Hello and welcome. My name is Lyndon Bird and I am DRI's Chief Knowledge Officer, and I also chair the Future Visions Committee for the DRI. This webinar is an opportunity for us as a committee to explain to you some of the projects and some of the activities that we've been involved with recently, and to showcase some of our newest thinking and some of the reports that we're actually producing. I'll come back toward the end of the webinar with telling you how to get hold of those reports, but at this stage we'll just move on with the general overview. Firstly, I guess some of you won't know much about the Future Vision Committee, so very briefly I'll give you a little bit of background to it. It was formed way back in 2016 as essentially as an important additional resource for the DRI's professional practices and to start developing additional thought leadership. It essentially consists of a group of subject matter experts in all aspects of business resilience. Some of the people that are on are not necessarily long-term business continuity people in the traditional sense. They may be experts in information security, they may be experts in crisis management, they may be experts in dealing with media issues. So all things that are related to the ability for us to continue to provide resilience to our organizations. We aim to provide advice to DRI professionals across the world, but particularly in the United States. And this is really quite impacted in both the media, academia, and government interest that is in the type of work we do. We produce a couple of very important two reports, in fact, each year, one in trends and one in predictions. But we also do other ad hoc studies into specific current topical issues. For example, some of the reports we've done in the past have covered COVID, have covered supply chain issues. We've covered a little bit, and we'll do more on artificial intelligence and specific topics of that nature. Some of those we've done jointly with partners, in particular with Eric McNulty, who's one of the speakers today's group at Harvard. Our current membership is from North America, Europe, and Asia, but we also include in our reports the data we've collected from Australia, New Zealand, and the Middle East. So this is the sort of type of work we do and the scope of work we do. So moving on to today, I'm going to talk a little bit, just briefly really, about the Trends Report before we get on to the bulk of the day, which is going to be the specialist topic discussion. And these are going to be done by three of our leading members of the Future Vision Committee: Eric McNulty, Richard Knowlton, and Stephen Lee. They're going to talk specifically about areas that they really are experts, very, very experienced experts in. And I think you'll get some interesting and fascinating insights from all of those. And then a little bit, we'll talk a bit about the predictions report as well, which I'll combine really with the discussion we have about the trends report. So that's really what we're going to be covering in the course of today. Perhaps we can just move on to the next slide then. Okay, the trends report. The trends report is quite a large report. It comes out of the DRI annual survey that we conduct on behalf of the DRI for asking a whole range of questions to the professional certificate holders of the DRI and other equivalent in other related industries, such as I say in risk, in security, in crisis management, in crisis comms. So we ask people of these in the professional levels in these what their opinions are about resilience issues, and try to determine the key resilience issues that concern this group. And this year, as most years over the last 5 or 6 years, top of the list has come cyber events. Cyber meaning events meaning anything really that can go wrong in the cyberspace. Second place, always popular, if the popular is the right word, is disruptions to ET through more conventional means, man-made, sabotage, just mistakes, general human errors. Natural disasters, very much a main theme throughout business continuity, even in the days of disaster recovery, and certainly as we move into the resilience age. And some others that you would expect to see in that bag, such as major facilities and power shortages. But new entries to this, which are probably items that a typical business continuity person may not have focused on in the past, such as financial conditions. In fact, are the conditions that are currently existing and the way that the business is running sufficient to be able to guarantee the resilience that is needed? Is the finance there to be able to guarantee that? And is that able to guarantee longer term stability? Same with HR, other HR issues, and are there HR resources available? Climate change, of course, cannot be ignored in any way at all, but it's very difficult to put it in an exact bag for business resilience. Often that manifests itself in natural disasters, but it's now starting to be looked at in isolation from that. And we will be talking more about that in our sessions today. And a couple that are perhaps unusual for resilience, traditional resilience professionals, are concerns about increased regulation and reputational damage. Just note the two that are in red are two items that we're going to have very, very detailed presentations which follow this overview from myself. So last slide, please. Okay, the predictions then, which was actually undertaken in November 2024, shortly after the presidential elections in the United States. And of course, some of these were predicted based upon what we knew at that point was likely to be attempted. And so some of them are already in action. Whether the end result of those, we of course don't know yet, and we don't know whether the success or the other unexpected consequences will emerge. But in terms of the predictions, we made predictions from a sort of geopolitical sense about Ukraine and the Middle East, particularly some issues about natural disasters and flooding and climate change issues in general. Some issues really related to perhaps geopolitical changes that might happen and some consequences to that, and things like policies on ESG and DEI, which are probably likely to be cut back from the key positions they had previously due to policies from the US government, and tariffs, which we are hearing a lot about and will continue to do so. And then perhaps of most interest, but more difficult to predict, is our prediction on AI. No one doubts its importance, its significance, and its growth. The question is, at what speed will it grow, and at what is it yet doing? To our experience, most of it would suggest that what it's doing at the moment is providing great advantages, speeding up processes, giving advantages to specialists and increasing the skill set of professionals. But it's not necessarily replacing professionals yet. That may be a challenge for the future, but we certainly don't see that happening in a great extent in the next year or so. So that's really where our prediction in that area comes from. Essentially, at this point, then it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, which is Eric McNulty. Now, Eric, I've known him quite a long time. I've done a number of special projects with him for the DRI, and he's a well-known educator, a much published author, and always very interesting to discuss and hear his views on all aspects of resilience. Eric will give us some strategic perceptions of where the world is today, and from a resilience perspective, what we've got to do about it and how we fit into this whole pattern. So I'd love now to introduce our first speaker, Eric McNulty.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric McNulty. I'm the Associate Director of the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative at Harvard and a member of the Future Vision Committee. And I was given the easy task of trying to explain to you current U.S. policies and its implications for resilience. So I'm just going to jump right in there and see if we can do this. Um, these slides have been updated up to the minute because policy keeps changing, and so it's become a bit of a challenging time, but I think we can begin to make sense of it and begin to look at what the implications are for all of us who are working around preparedness, resilience, business continuity, and related areas. The first is a bit of level setting. When I speak about leading for resilience, I talk about bringing people into an uncertain future with hope, confidence, and agency. Hope, because they've got to believe there's a better day ahead than there was behind. That's part of what motivates us as humans. Confidence and understanding that they can count on those around them, the systems they use, and the organizations for which they work. I think most important for their colleagues and their fellow humans in the system. And then agency, because people need to feel like they can do something, they can take action, they have some control over what's going on. And that's a particularly challenge now because there is so much ambiguity. And as I say, I say this in a nonpartisan way, but the current administration is driving a fair amount of, I say, uncertainty and turbulence with lots of policy sort of emerging by the day and changing as fast as it comes out. And so what does that mean? Well, working in resilience has always been about trying to balance or harmonize certainty and uncertainty, right? What can you count on and what's going to change? And how do we have our plans, our protocols, our drills, all of the things we put in place to try and prepare for that uncertainty so that we're ready for it? And traditionally, there were some things we thought of as relatively stable. Core institutions, market structures, the basic regulatory frameworks that govern things like international trade, long-term alliances, trading relationships, the foundational data we get from government and other sources we can always count on, and then the values that mark our different societies. And I know people on this call are coming from around the world, so we've got lots of variations of this, but these were all relatively stable, and certainly in the US they were. And then we thought of as relatively fluid were these things that, again, change more quickly. So yeah, while institutions may stay the same, the various administrations have policy in one direction or the other. And markets are stable, but the market conditions can gyrate wildly, and so on. You can see the list here. So there are things we expect to be, again, relatively solid, and things we expect to be on the move, and we try and plan accordingly. We put together our risk registers, try and forecast probabilities, and see, how can we best be ready for whatever may impact our organization or our extended enterprise, including supply chains, customers, and other stakeholders. And so what we're seeing right now are cracks in the foundations. So a lot of what we thought of was relatively stable actually has become much more fluid. As we see that the U.S. has withdrawn from the Paris Accords and the WHO, that we have seen possibly NATO in jeopardy, that we've got tariffs against Canada, Mexico, you pick, and they're again changing by the day. So all of these things inject a lot more uncertainty into the system. That makes our jobs a lot more difficult because it's much harder to predict when everything seems to be in flux. And so I think this is the world we're going to be seeing for a while at least, because it appears that the current policies being made largely through executive order, not through traditional legislative processes that would take a while to unfold, and you'd have lots of back and forth and negotiation, and you would get some sense of what was happening. And but what we're seeing now is that it comes out rapid fire. You never quite know, and we're all trying to keep up. I know on my side, trying to see what's going on, and you can't, even we talk to people who are in the government, they don't quite know what's coming next. And so this is going to be a real challenge for us. And if you go to the next slide, please. So what we've seen is that this administration is predictably unpredictable. They like to be unpredictable. It's one of the things they sold themselves on during the election, was to be a bit of a wild card and keep people on their toes. And they saw that as an advantage. And it certainly, whether it's an advantage or not, it certainly is true in terms of how they're operating. But that also makes them somewhat predictable. We know that they like a big headline. We know that they like to say they're winning. They like to have to dominate situations, as we've seen in everything from domestic politics to the relationship with Ukraine. They like to be seen in a very dominant position, and they like to make pronouncements. And so again, we've got these executive order after executive order after executive order coming through. And so you can see that happening. And as you begin to look for patterns, and they aren't 100% clear yet, we also see they like to reverse things as well. They pay a lot of attention to the stock market, at least they have until the last few days, and tend to react there. And I think the financial executives and institutions will have some sway into putting some guardrails around the administration. But again, I don't predict anything with any certainty at this point. But you can know that this is the pattern in which they're trying to operate. And again, it seems chaotic, but begin to look for your industry, for your sector, for your region if you're outside of the U.S. What seems to be happening, where things are falling in favor, out of favor. It's a very transactional administration. They like to get more than they give. Again, that's a basic deal-making style the president has favored for a long time. So it should not be a surprise to anyone, whether you like it or not. This is the way he operates. And so, you have to stay on your toes. You have to be much more prepared to sort of sense, respond, and adapt to what's happening rather than thinking you're going to have a predictable environment in which to plan and let things unfold. Next slide, please. So what's the antidote here? How can you begin to center your resilience work in this rather chaotic time? Well, I think it comes down really to trust. Trust between your trustworthiness as an individual, the trust you have in your team, in your organization, across your extended enterprise, your suppliers, your customers, any intermediaries you use, that to the extent that you can create some certainty and put some order into the system by being true to your values, by being credible in terms of what you say, what you deliver, making sure you're as reliable as you can be, because people are looking for someone and something to count on. Try and be as ready as you can be. Again, knowing that the upheaval can be somewhat unpredictable or seem to come out of nowhere. Realize you're going to have to be ready to pivot frequently. I put a lot of focus on relationships because relationships are the thing that can endure through difficulty. Again, if I know I have people I can count on, people I can reach out to, that gives me something to hold on to. It makes it much easier to weather all the disruption. And really a continued commitment to the mission of your organization and what you're trying to achieve. Again, if people know where you're trying to go and that you're going to be true to that you're taking care of people along the way, it will help block out some of the external craziness that's coming from the policy world right now until things settle down. And so I think this is where I would focus in terms of your resilience work, both with your internal partners as well as your external partners, to be that one that people can count on. Next slide, please. And so as you're thinking forward, this is really a time when you're looking into a very murky future right now. But I would be engaged in futures thinking if you aren't already, which means planning for multiple futures, looking for what are the variables that are most likely or least likely to change. What are the faint signs on the horizon you're looking for that may indicate that something is going in one direction or the other. Be engaged in active scenario planning, so you will know if you suddenly can't move your operations, your backup operations from one part of the world to the other, as you may have expected to be able to do 6 months ago. What's that going to be? If you have key supplies coming from places where you may suddenly be seeing tariffs and prices go way up, what are you going to do then? I think this is the time to be doing a lot of scenario planning, putting a lot of variables on the table so that you orient yourself and all your team to be ready for change, because agility and responsiveness are going to be the words of the day. Your ability to be able to move quickly, as we did this in the beginning of COVID. We've done it other times, and I think now it's just coming on a lot of different fronts. And perhaps the last thing I will leave you with is to know what we call your no line, which is what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And that may be in terms of sourcing supplies. It may be in terms of compliance with certain things the government asks you to do, or that you may get public pressure to do. Again, this is why I think it's so important to be true to your values, to your mission, to the relationships that are critical to your business, is that it can be really easy to get pulled into a very uncomfortable place without realizing it when everything is as disrupted as it is right now. So be true to that. I was very happy to be talking to some people recently doing some research on the non-government response to Hurricane Helene down in North Carolina here in the U.S. And one of the things I heard consistently from the private sector entities was that the people at the top said, just do the right thing. And that gave them both guidance, some guardrails, but also permission to act. And so knowing that that's what your organization stands for and that you're willing to stand by it is what's going to be absolutely critical to navigating what is otherwise a very turbulent and somewhat chaotic policy scene coming from here in the U.S. That's the picture briefly. I hope we have time for questions at the end. And now I will hand it over to our next presenter.
So I'd like to pass on now to the next section. The next section is very important because in our surveys that we do with our professional base, the issue that comes up as of most concern year after year, it was briefly interrupted, of course, by COVID, but for many years, the most important issue that is coming up every year and most concern to resilience professionals is cyber. The cyber threat, where we are, where governments are, where we're placed as a world, essentially, in managing to deal with cyber. And on this basis, I think there's no one better to talk more about this subject today than Richard. So I'd like to hand over now to Richard Knowlton to talk to us about the cyber threat we face. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyndon. And as Lyndon said, for the third year running, cyber threats have topped our list of resilience issues. And he's asked me to cover three broad topics. First, an overview of how I see the current main cyber threats, then how we're doing in dealing with the threats, and finally, a word or two on the risks from emerging technologies like AI and quantum computing. It's a lot of ground to cover, but I hope I can give you a taste of how the world of cybersecurity is highly dynamic, it's fascinating, and it's a bit scary all at the same time. So here we go. Starting with the current threat landscape, I'm going to pick up just two themes that will continue to dominate cybersecurity thinking. And so that's ransomware and the activities of state actors. The ransomware threat continues to evolve at a rapid pace, and the bad guys are relentless and innovative. They demand payments for the release of stolen or encrypted data, and in a recent twist, they're increasingly demanding money not to cripple their victim systems through additional attacks such as DDoS, distributed denial of service exploits. I don't want to weigh you down with statistics, but I'll give you a few numbers to illustrate where we are. Last year in 2024, we saw the largest single ransom payment ever made public when an unnamed Fortune 50 company paid, wait for it, $75 million to a hacking group. Meanwhile, the average ransom demand last year was around $2.7 million, and that's up nearly $1 million from the year before 2023. And finally, in 2024, ransomware groups extorted more than $800 million from their victims. Now, obviously, these are impressive numbers, but it's not all bad news. In fact, that 800 million actually means a 35% decrease from the year before, when the figure was 1.25 billion. So you have to ask, what's going on? First, in 2024, there was some successful coordinated action by law enforcement. US and UK agencies collaborated to disrupt the major Lockbit ransomware group, and its income went down by almost 90% as a result. And that's good news, of course, but research suggests that in 2024, 31 new ransomware groups entered the ecosystem. Law enforcement shuts down one group, and others immediately emerge to fill the vacuum. A second positive factor is the increasing gap between the ransom demanded by criminals and what they actually get paid. Incident response data suggests that in the second half of last year, there was a 53% difference between those two factors. Indeed, it seems that a majority of the clients of incident response firms are choosing not to pay altogether. On the other hand, and forgive me, there are lots of other hands in this conversation. While fewer organizations pay ransoms, those who do pay face much higher amounts. The main reason is that ransomware gangs are targeting larger organizations and critical infrastructure providers, focusing on high-profile attacks that yield bigger payouts. And a final factor is good old-fashioned resilience planning. Guess what? When organizations improve their cyber hygiene and work hard on their overall resiliency, they're much better able to resist ransom demands and can explore multiple options to recover from an attack. So in my tour of current threats, let's look next at state actors in general and the emergence of hybrid warfare. States hack to collect domestic, foreign, and commercial intelligence, to control and manipulate information, and with the increasing importance of industrial control systems, to have the means to destroy or disable an adversary's critical national infrastructure. Some states also want to steal money. Just 3 weeks ago, hackers stole around 1.46 billion in crypto assets from a Dubai-based cryptocurrency exchange. Probably the biggest known financial theft of all time, and almost certainly the work of North Korean hackers, who are notorious for stealing money to help finance North Korea's heavily sanctioned economy. Meanwhile, in recent years, China has launched a whole series of frankly shockingly successful attacks on US interests, including the recent attacks on multiple companies in the US telecoms infrastructure. Just last week, the DOJ and the FBI announced criminal charges against 12 Chinese nationals said to be involved in a long-running state cyber espionage campaign. The indictments reveal fascinating insights into the operational methods of state-sponsored threat actors, including the use of so-called cyber mercenaries. And I'll talk more about this in a moment. We're also seeing a steady growth in cyber attacks related to hybrid warfare. In late 2023, the then US National Security Advisor said that Chinese hackers now had the ability to shut down dozens of US ports, power grids, and other infrastructure targets at will. And it's not just the Chinese. Early in 2025, a NATO spokesman said that Russia and other malicious actors were targeting the underwater cables and pipes that connect Europe's energy and communications networks. And there are other well-documented examples of Russian and Iranian attacks on water and power infrastructure in Europe and Canada, as well as in the US. There's increasing concern too about what I described just now as cyber mercenaries, private sector actors who develop, provide, or support offensive cyber capabilities in return for payment. And it's a market that's growing rapidly. It includes buyers and sellers of a wide range of services, each of which may overlap with legitimate uses of cyber technologies. The buyers in this market are often state actors, and we know that over the past 15 years, at least 74 national governments have leveraged cyber mercenaries just for spyware. The sellers, the cyber mercenaries, are often small private firms that develop and sell sophisticated cyber capabilities. They may help states disrupt or destroy their adversaries' infrastructure, censor, harass, or spy on political dissidents, profit from ransomware, or steal classified or proprietary information. This obviously suits the states that use their services by providing some level of deniability of their own involvement. So in my second section, let's see how we are doing in managing all this hostile cyber activity. And again, I'll pick up just two elements that I think are particularly important: the role of international cooperation and the future landscape of regulation. As I said earlier, in the context of ransomware, international law enforcement cooperation has had to develop fast in the face of cybercrime for the obvious reason that no single entity, no matter its capabilities or experience, can combat the hackers effectively alone. So a couple of examples. Bringing together 71 countries, the International Counter-Ransomware Initiative and Task Force form the world's largest international cyber partnership. They support their members' counter-ransomware operations, and they develop best practices on resilience, disruption, and capacity building. Meanwhile, the UN, the United Nations, has been running multiple initiatives on cybersecurity for many years. All of this is good, but these multilateral initiatives are painfully slow and complicated by geopolitical tensions that show no signs of easing. A word on the future landscape of regulation. It's a huge subject, obviously, and I can only scratch the surface. It's common practice to see the world divided into three broad regulatory systems. The US treats data as a commercial opportunity and leaves the management of cyber risk largely to the market. The EU treats data as an asset to be protected in the interests of the citizen. And finally, of course, in China, Russia, and other authoritarian regimes, data is something that must be controlled by the state. It's going to be fascinating to see how these largely incompatible approaches play out. In the last 10 years or so, the EU has passed a raft of highly prescriptive cybersecurity legislation that impacts all the companies that operate within its jurisdictions. In one way, I'd say the results have been positive. Businesses and their senior managers are now much more aware of cyber risk management and the need to avoid the very heavy fines that come with non-compliance. But I do worry that this heavily regulatory approach leaves businesses with no choice but to switch scarce cybersecurity expertise from operations to compliance. And there's also the bigger picture when it comes to geopolitics and specifically the EU-US relationship. GDPR fines on big US tech companies like Meta, Google, and Amazon now exceed $4 billion. In a transactional world, I do have to wonder how long the tech bros and the US administration will tolerate what they see as discriminatory interference with well-established business models. And so rapidly to my final section, let me say a few words about risks from emerging technologies. And inevitably, I have to start with artificial intelligence, with AI. In 2024, over 50% of all new venture capital investments went into AI service and related companies. So obviously, a lot of investors and corporate leaders have strong reason to push a narrative of the inevitable success of AI. That may well be, but there do remain concerns about the so-called AI bubble, or more crudely, the AI hype gap. We saw this most clearly with the arrival in January of the Chinese AI model DeepSeek R1, a model that challenged a lot of Western business assumptions. So what's the real state of play with the rollout of AI? AI adoption is certainly growing, and large businesses in finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure in particular are investing heavily in AI. But uptake varies greatly by industry, company size, and risk exposure. And I'd say at 50 to 55%, AI adoption is nowhere near what the hype might lead you to expect. When it comes to AI and cybersecurity, of course, AI can enhance the efficiency, accuracy, and response times of cybersecurity operations. It's important to remember, I think, that AI is not a standalone solution. It works best when it's combined with human expertise and traditional cybersecurity measures. And of course, AI works both ways. It also helps the hackers by automating and enhancing hacking tactics and by making some traditional defenses less effective. AI also lowers the barrier for less skilled cybercriminals to execute sophisticated attacks. I know my time is almost up, so let me close with a few words on quantum computing and why I think it matters for cyber security. Big tech companies like IBM, Google, Microsoft, and just last week, Amazon, regularly talk up their achievements in developing quantum technology, but we still seem no closer to the delivery of viable quantum computers. The problem lies with the extremely complex technical difficulties involved in developing viable hardware. Why does quantum computing matter to cybersecurity? Well, we've known since the 1990s that quantum computers will pose a major threat to the encryption standards that protect our most sensitive data, particularly in government and the financial sector. In fact, the race to develop and implement quantum-resistant cryptography has been a major priority for years. In 2016, for example, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, launched a competition among the cryptographic community to devise cryptography that could resist an attack from a future quantum computer. But realistically, how long have we got? How long before we have a quantum computer ready to handle the highly complex calculations that might threaten our crypto? The CEO of NVIDIA, the leading chip maker, predicts that it'll be another 15 to 30 years, while Amazon reckon 10 to 20 years. So why am I raising this now? Well, I'd say there are three reasons. First of all, adversaries like China and Russia are putting massive resources into the development of a viable quantum computer. We can have no idea of when they might succeed, and they certainly won't tell us when they do. Second, we know that hostile state actors are already harvesting data against the day when they can decrypt it. And finally, a really practical point. Just imagine how long it will take complex organizations to plan and implement the rollout of post-quantum cryptography. Do they even have the staff qualified to plan and execute such a major upgrade? In my view, and I've been talking about this for several years, all of us need to be thinking and preparing now for the arrival of quantum computing. And apologies, this has been a real whirlwind tour of some of the issues that I spend my time working on in cybersecurity. Thanks for attention, and I'll hand you back to Lyndon.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Richard. We've had to slightly reorganize the planned running order because of my late arrival, but I think you probably were incredibly interested in both the presentations that we got from Eric and from Richard, two real world experts in the subjects that we're talking about. And that, I think, is a demonstration of the strength of the DRI's Future Vision Committee, where we have really world experts in specific topics to add to the knowledge and skills that we bring to the resilience world through our own resilience professionals that serve on the committee. So with that, I'd like to turn my attention to our third guest speaker on the webinar tonight, and that is a gentleman who is actually our most recent addition to the Future Vision Committee, Stephen Lee. Stephen is a well-known presenter at DRI events, and I certainly welcome the contribution that he can make. I had an excellent presentation that I really enjoyed listening to at DRI 2025 in Vegas recently, and he's going to today talk particularly about issues related to natural disasters and climate risk, which is a topic that I know he's very interested in, very experienced in. So could I now hand over to Stephen for the final presentation of this session. Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Yep. Thank you very much, Lyndon. Can all of you hear me and see my slides?
I can.
Okay, great. I'll get started. Let me see. I'll start my discussion here with a quick reference to the 2025 Predictions Report from the Future Visions Committee. There were two climate-related topics that we highlighted. Today, I'm going to focus more on prediction number 3. It was focused on flooding in different regions. That's one of our predictions for this year. And we'll be tracking that to see how that plays out the rest of the year. But this is really driven by the late hurricanes in the US last year, regional floods in Spain, as well as the extensive rains in Australia. That really caused us to think that flooding in particular will happen a lot more. But as Lyndon said, I'm going to expand my talk more about climate-related disasters. So here I have various graphics of 6 different types of climate-driven changes in the environment. We are expecting ongoing increases in terms of intensity, the duration, and the impact of these natural disasters. 9 out of the 10 9 out of the 10 years with the highest number of natural disasters happened in the last decade. So the top 10 natural disasters over the last 50 years, 9 of them happened in the last decade. So we know that we are seeing more catastrophic events. These are often at the extreme ends of the weather patterns, right? So I've strategically placed these 6 on different ends. The implications of all of these natural disasters. So you have extreme drought, but also extensive flooding. You have wildfires and heat waves, but also an increase of severe winter storm, freezes in places that we don't typically see extreme cold weathers, as well as tropical cyclones. So these are some of the top climate-related events that we should be expecting a lot more of. For resilience planning professionals, what this means is our risk mitigation planning must now expand both in terms of the time range and the scope. So years ago out here in California, when we're focused on BC planning for wildfires, we would focus on just the typical fire season, but now we have to be prepared to for a year-long fire season. Places, again, such as Texas that haven't seen as much of the freezes and extreme weather, we're starting to see some of these extreme weather patterns. So we all have to plan ahead in terms of different weather events for the organization. I have a graphic here. I know it's pretty difficult to see the chart to the left, but it's really for visual impact. 3 of the top 20 disasters since 1980 occurred last year. So Hurricane Helene, resulting in over 215 deaths, close to 220 actually. Hurricane Milton, 32 deaths, and then flooding in China with over 600 deaths. The leading driver of these increases here, you see here in pink, really it's severe storms. So we're seeing a lot more of these severe storms, tropical cyclone, as well as flood events. I know we have friends from outside the United States. So globally, last year, we had 58 weather disasters that cost over $1 billion. That's compared to the US, we had 19 of those events last year. And globally, among these $1 billion plus events, 3 of the top 20 costly weather disaster on record last year, the 5th deadliest wildfire, as well as 3 heat waves in 2024 that cost over 1,000 deaths each. Collectively, this resulted in estimated economic damage of $402 billion. So the cost is not only to the infrastructure and the property destroyed and the lives lost, but also broad economic cost. All right. This is a graphic from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And this is a tracker of last year's $1 billion plus weather and climate disasters. We see that flooding accounts for 90% of natural disasters. Typically, tropical cyclones are responsible for the highest number of deaths. And heat waves follow the tropical cyclones and then followed by severe storms. If you look at the map here, you see that a number of these events are concentrated in areas where they're very prone to severe weather. Texas leads the US in terms of the number of major natural disasters. They've had over 185 natural disasters that cost $1 billion since the 1980s. This is followed by Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, and North Carolina. So even though I'm from California and we focus a lot on the natural disasters here, we do see this trend happening throughout the US. I do want to focus on the LA fires since as a resilience professional, that kept me quite active and busy throughout the month of January. As Lyndon shared, I also talked about this topic at the last DRI conference. As many of you know, during the month of January, Southern California experienced 17 major wildfires. This is over a course of 25 days. There were a few conditions that made this really a perfect firestorm. So the first one was the previous year, we experienced an extremely wet season. We had over 30 so-called atmospheric rivers. So these are not your typical rainstorms. These were multi-day weather systems that came through Southern California. Obviously, with a lot of rain, there would be a lot of growth in vegetation and just being able to cause a lot of kind of growth in the forestry. Secondly, this was followed by another extreme. It was followed by one of the driest season on record. So from one of the wettest seasons to one of the driest seasons. And then the third, which I think was the final factor to make January such a dangerous situation for Southern California, was our annual Santa Ana winds. We had winds of up to 100 miles per hour, and each of these factors were extreme. You can see that our initial estimated costs, $250 billion, impacted 200,000 residents, had to evacuate, and close to 500,000 customers out of power. Quickly on Palisades and Eaton fire, collectively, those two fires burned about over 37,000 acres, over 16,000 structures destroyed, 29 deaths. Lots of impacts to infrastructure, but I do want to note that there are lots of non-economic impact that we're still trying to figure out. This is a poll that came out just yesterday from the Los Angeles Times. Heavy emotional tolls of those who impacted, who received the fire threats and evacuated. Nearly half felt moderate or high stress levels. Since the onset of the fires, more than 2/3 of residents felt that their quality of life have changed and they needed to change their day-to-day behaviors. And then strikingly, close to half of those who experienced impacts from the Palisades and Eaton fires, they're now potentially considering moving out of Los Angeles. That's compared to only 23% of those who did not experience these type of impacts. So this will have implications on our organizations in terms of HR planning and just future business planning. To put the two fires in context, here are the top 10 fires in California history. Eaton and Palisades quickly rose to 2 and 3. And as you can see here, looking at the dates of these top 10 fires, a lot of them happened over the last several years. I do want to spend some time talking about the recovery and rebuilding. So after catastrophic events like this, we want to focus on the immediate actions. And some of this has already started. Some of these will be started very soon. So the immediate actions in the last couple of months, obviously reopening and repopulation of the impacted communities. providing emergency consumer protections such as rent gouging protections, ensuring that people are not being taken advantage of, full and transparent multi-agency review at all levels of government and the emergency service responses. So I'll talk about that just in a minute. Short term, we are starting to think about, how do we continue to shelter and provide support for the fire victims. We are working on the debris removal and cleanup. This will require multi-level agency coordination. And again, the post-fire hazard assessments, this will be separate from an AAR. So we will have an AAR about things we could have done better, things that went well. However, we also need to conduct future assessments on how do we do better long-term planning. So all of this will have implications for our urban planning and risk-based building model. Further investments in emergency management or looking at how we are allocating resources, potentially emergency preparedness education for the public. So employers may increasingly have a responsibility to educate their employees and associates on what to do during a fire. How do you evacuate? How do you put together a safety and emergency kit? Here in California, we do a lot of work on earthquake, but increasingly we will need to do the same thing for fire planning as well. And then lastly, I want to close on the LA County's after action review. The Board of Supervisors at the county have called for an independent review. This is going to be led by retired General Stanley McChrystal. This review is already underway and it's set to be delivered in early March. But some of the focus of this is obviously the actions and factors that led to the deaths of 29 individuals. Specifically for resilience professional, I think what we'll be looking at is the evacuation policies, as well as a lot of issues that came up during the fires with the LA County Emergency Alert Notification. I know a lot of your companies use similar mass notification tools. So this is something that we'll be watching out for. Other areas of focus include water resource management, the allocation and planning of our firefighter resources. And then, of course, what can we do to prevent this, whether it's assessing the planning and building codes to the forestry management and vegetation clearing. And I will pause now for any questions. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. All right. I think I see a question here. Are there global sustainability compliance regulations that might influence U.S. businesses? Yeah, I think this will be industry specific, right? So some industries may be more active in complying or being in sync with global sustainability compliance regulations. But I think this will be based on sort of your specific company's appetite for those compliance. Certainly, sometimes this could be the social corporate responsibility could be used as a branding or marketing strategy, right? Being able to say that you're a responsible global corporation.
I'd like to thank you then, Stephen, for that. I think we because of time pressures, we'll probably not be able to take any more questions at the moment, but I think that was a very insightful presentation. As always, when I hear you speak, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us tonight, and or today, or this morning, in whatever the time is in the various time zones that we are based in. Okay, now, what I'd like you to do is, if you've enjoyed the webinar today and have been challenged by some of the presentations and some of the ideas that have been raised, to have a look at our reports. They do not cost anything, which is always a good thing. You will have to register your contact details and register for the reports when you get them, but you don't have to be a certified member of the DRI or anything of that nature to get access to the reports. So if you go to the DRI website, go to resources, and within that look in the library, you'll be able to access all of the reports. And if you're actually even extremely interested by that, you can actually look at previous year's reports to look how well we did and what our predictions were in previous years, and see how things have changed a lot. So perhaps interestingly, that will perhaps provide some context to the overall discussion this evening. Thank you, Jeff. Any more slides, Jeff? Yeah, basically the basic one. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm sorry it was a little bit disjointed right at the beginning, but I hope we've brought up with everything that we intended to say. I think we had three very good presentations, and I really hope that you'll read the reports and hopefully meet some of you next year at DRI 2026 in Jacksonville. So thank you again and good evening.